professor of comparative religion at Concordia University in Montreal, which is a large secular university with about 30,000 students and 2 campuses. And the Department of Religious Studies, or Comparative Religion, deals with world religions, East and West, and culture. I've been at Concordia for a number of years. In addition to that, I'm an Anglican priest and have been involved since 1972 in psychical research in order to relate it to religious studies, the history of religions on the one hand, and to new paradigms for science on the other hand, new paradigms for science which will help to help us to understand the relationship between science and spirituality, between science and the history of religions, a little better than our present paradigms in science do.
Mm-hmm. So, how is it that science nowadays, they are searching, they are investigating on one side, and they are forgetting everything about spirituality, and also all these phenomena that take place in those spiritual people, but they are investigating and researching through different means, through the material things, through the material world.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about that?
Well, I think you put your finger right on the problem. For the past 300 years or more, since the so-called Age of Reason and Enlightenment in Western civilization, we have concentrated upon the physically observable and logically computable. In other words, we have concentrated in science, we have concentrated on that which can be physically observed and then logically understood on the basis of physical observation. And the fathers of Western philosophy in the modern period, people like René Descartes, the fathers of Western scientific method like Francis Bacon, focused us on the outer manifestations. But in the ancient world, among the Greeks, and in India, in the great traditions of Asia, India and China, science included more than just that. Science was systematic human knowledge, which included not only knowledge of the physically observable and logically computable, but knowledge of the interior states of man and the modes of expression that it employs, myth and symbol, religious ritual, things that motivate people to give them concern in one direction or another, ethical concern. All of these things now lie outside of the parameters of science because we've limited it for 300 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are many experiences that people have that are written off as subjective, and yet those experiences determine whether or not a person will become literally a god or a devil, an angel or a beast, whether that person will care about others and remaking the world to be a better place, or whether one won't care about it. Those are subjective experiences. Science has made itself impotent to study those by an arbitrary definition of its own limitations for the past 300 years in Western civilization.
I see. When you study, these comparative religions, what is your approach to the different religions of the world?
Well, my personal approach is first a phenomenological approach, to study the experiences and the phenomena in the history of different religious traditions and find out what they meant to the people who had those experiences, who developed those interpretations and those institutions. Mm-hmm. Not to impose my interpretation as a Christian or someone else's interpretation as a Jew or a communist on the data, but to develop a perspective which anyone, regardless of their philosophy or ideology or religious premises, could say that is a fair appraisal of the experiences and the interpretations of those experiences that the people in that tradition have and had. First of all, we have to take a photograph of something and see it clearly before we interpret it, don't we?
Right, that's right.
Most people are interpreting it while they have a blurred photograph.
Yeah, that's right.
This is called the Phenomenological Approach.
Mm-hmm.
That is to say, to leave the lens of the camera open until you can see what's there before you appraise it for yourself. And then to make a distinction between the appraisal you make of it and what it was that the original people in that event intended. Mm-hmm. The original people in that tradition intended. From your standpoint, in 1984 or thereafter, as a person from Spain of a Catholic tradition, or my standpoint as a person from Canada, from an Anglican tradition, we can look at Mahayana Buddhism or Hinayana Buddhism. We can look at Hinduism in the Gupta period in India, and we can come up with our own appraisal of that. But our own appraisal of that is not important until we have seen what was going on there and what those people intended, and what the positive and negative things from the standpoint of the original founders of that tradition were. Then after that, we can say, well, now that is either relevant to me as a Spaniard of Catholic tradition in Spain in 1984, or it's irrelevant to me, or it's good or it's no good from my standpoint. Or as an Anglican in Canada, it's good or no good from my standpoint, or useful or not useful. But that's a separate issue from what the thing is in itself. You see?
Yeah. So, now you come to the conclusion now that all the religions of the world, I mean all those people who really founded a tradition, had a really high experience of consciousnness.
Yes.
And all of them came to realize the same experience, actually. So,
right.
So what do you think is the cause for, this turmoil that exists nowadays in all religions of the world? Is it because we have lost high perspective of the real tradition? Or is it because we are involved only in rituals and all these type of things without going deep into the subject that these people taught?
Well, I think you've hit a good part of the problem. You've described a good part of the problem from my standpoint. I see it that way. You see, we have forgotten in Western psychology that there are states and levels of consciousness. There are stages of evolution of spiritual and psychological and ethical maturity, not only in individuals from the age of 5 to the age of 25 and the age of 50. People mature and grow. They either become worse or they become better from an ethical standpoint. They understand more psychologically, and they're more sympathetic, and they're more constructive, or they're more destructive. There is a difference between the stage of evolution of the psychology and the spirituality and the ethics of people in every tradition, as well as of individuals. So now, the founders of the major religious traditions obviously had some kind of a gripping experience of some description, an experience in which they saw a transcendent dimension of reality which was more real than the phenomenal world, or a psychic or mystical experience which broke through to them and changed their value systems, or they were people who philosophized about ethics on the basis of things that were very, very real to them in their state of consciousness. And obviously they convinced others, or they wouldn't have been founders of religious traditions, would they? Other people gathered around them and had the same experiences or thought the same thoughts, because these individuals were charismatic type personalities who were able to communicate their enthusiasm, their spirit, their consciousness, and together those people, the masters and the disciples, shall we say, built new traditions that in some cases took over as the dominant force in entire cultures, in entire civilizations. It is Confucianism in China, Christianity at the end of the late imperial period in the West, and so on. We have today inherited the codified scriptures and the codified traditions and institutions that were put together centuries ago by men and women who had great insights and great experiences and great hopes for themselves and spirit of man and woman in the New World. The New World to them. But today, we are perpetrators to a large extent of institutions. We have the Holy Book, and we don't want any more revelation. We don't want any more experience. We have the institution, and we want only those who have juridical authority in the institution, whether it's the Catholic Church or the Buddhist Sangha or the Jewish rabbinate or whatever, to decide on what is and what is not an ethical or spiritual decision in that tradition. You see, now this is quite different from the free, open milieu in which the founders of religious traditions and their early disciples operated. So that today, what masks itself as a religious issue is really an issue between peoples, cultures, between political and economic and social issues in those cultures. So when you have wars between Protestants and Catholics, for example, in Ireland, it's a socio-political and economic issue. The people happen to have inherited a Catholic or Protestant tradition, but that's really incidental, and yet they use that as the banner. The same with the Jews and the Arabs. There are centuries of misunderstanding in the Middle East that lie behind these issues that have really nothing to do with the great monotheistic insights both of Judaism and Islam. And you go around the world and you'll find that what masks itself as religious turmoil is really a political, economic, and social conflict. And I think religion gets blamed for that. But what is the kind of religion that is helping people to perpetrate that is obviously a kind of loyalty to the culture, loyalty to the tribe, loyalty to the people, and loyalty to the nation. It really is very different from the loyalty to an inner experience of God, of the mystery of the universe, or of transcendence, which makes you feel that all people are brothers, that the whole universe, sun, moon, stars, plants, animals, human beings are bound together in a tether of life with whom we have to live in love. That's the experience of the founders of those religions. But after centuries, people who perpetrate the traditions are ready to commission armies to go to war with one another over cultural rights, which have nothing to do with those original spiritual insights.
So, what is your personal opinion, for instance, about the Vatican? I mean, how the Pope operates, who really, all this paraphernalia around him just to attack people. Is it because of, again, is it because of power of those people who are around all this, around all this tradition, and the ego wants to institutionalize all this power in a way or another, just want to concentrate it, and from there just to be able to dictate rules and regulations and this and that to everybody else. And also, not only because of that, is it also because people really need something to believe in, right? Because maybe there's not enough maturity in our minds just to look for something by ourselves. You know what I mean? Instead of being related to another person who's going to give you security, who's going to give you knowledge, who's going to say to you, okay, I take the responsibility for you, and if you follow these rules, you are going to go to heaven or whatever. You see what I mean?
You've touched on a lot of very complicated issues in the history of religions. First, you've asked me about the Vatican, and I have to warn you from the outset that you're asking an Anglican priest a question about the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. But I'm not going to answer it from a traditional Protestant or Anglican standpoint. I'm going to answer it, I hope, from a more impartial historical perspective. All religious organizations that develop bureaucracies have to pay the price of confinement of the spirit by that bureaucracy. All religious organizations that have authoritative channels for regulating teachings or administering properties and personnel, which is, of course, what you've got, not only in the Roman Catholic Church, but in my own Anglican Church and in the Greek Orthodox Church, just as much, almost, or in certain other great hierarchies that have existed in Eastern religions, the relationships between various monasteries and grand abbots in China was a very important political issue in medieval China. Whenever you get that kind of large hierarchical organizational principle, even when you get it in a government, the civil service can run away with the best intentions of governments, even governments that are bent on reform. These things are hard to move. It's a base that is lethargic. Having said that, that's one of the things I want to say. All religious organizations, all religions, religious movements need some kind of an organization. Even in the Gurukula principle in Hinduism, in yoga and Vedanta, the guru and his immediate followers usually govern the ashram and usually decide what is and what is not a safe practice, a safe sadhana, various ideas about meditation or yoga or spirituality that can be safely followed by the neophyte, by the disciple. So we can see that in the human situation, religious organizations develop. The problem is that we pay the price of extreme lethargy and slowness and mechanism, routinization on the part of that organization. Now, I think, let's go back to your question about the Vatican. The papacy has performed a very important function historically in Western civilization. It brought together through the period between the 5th century AD until the early Middle Ages, all of the petty chiefdoms and kingdoms of Europe and fashioned them into the major nations of Europe, taught them, brought the Code of Justinian in form of Roman Catholic canon law to equalize the concepts of justice and law throughout Europe. It did away through Christianization of many Northern European lands with very primitive practices, including human sacrifice in parts of Europe and Scandinavia and Balkan states. It gave the alphabet to Eastern Europe, the Serbian script, which is now the basis of Russian script. The Church in history, and the Vatican in specific as the centralized steering device behind the Church in Europe, had a tremendous role to play in the building of a great civilization. The problem came that the tension between exertion of monarchical authority versus the allowing of grassroots freedom for the expression of creativity, reform, and positive elements on local levels began to tip in favor of the overarching monarchical authority, to the point where the grassroots was not able to make its contribution in spiritual, creative, intellectual ways that it might have. And so the first sign of that was the encounter between the East and the West in 1054 when the Greek Church split from the Latin Church. Then the Protestant Reformations occurred in the 1500s in Northern Europe, and the remaining Roman Catholic portions of Europe were tightened in their allegiance to the papacy. There was a greater adherence to papal authority than there even had been in the medieval church before that. And right through to the 19th century, there were tremendous struggles all over Europe. For example, the Italian independence movement made its headway really against the claims of the papacy in Italy, the papal states in Italy. And right into the 20th century, the papacy has played a part in Eastern and Western European politics. It still is. We can see the issue between the Pope and Poland, the present Pope and Poland, the moral and spiritual influence in the West of the papacy and in Poland. So we have to take these things as they are and recognize that the best hope is that there will be a kind of balancing of elements between the monarchical elements and the elements of freedom individual creativity, spirituality, but above all, concern of that bureaucracy for the people who are dispossessed, the people who are suppressed. 2/3 of the world goes to bed, we're told by world statistics, hungry every night. We have to, if the papacy wants to perform its function, the function that it performed in the Middle Ages to civilize barbarian kings, with politicians, presidents, and dictators in the 20th century, then it has to preach social justice as well as spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening means exploration of religions east and west, of mystical experience, psychic experience, spiritual experience, outside of Christian parameters, because it's happening outside of Christian parameters even in the West. The Church has to become, if it's going to embrace that, truly universal again, truly Catholic in the real meaning of that sense, and open itself up to things like the study of Yoga Vedanta, open itself up to the realization that the spiritual and mystical experiences of people in other religious traditions are important to the foundational insights of Christ himself. And also that when people are oppressed, that it is God, it is Christ in the form of those people who are oppressed, who are being beaten down, and that its responsibility is not to play power politics, but to use its influence constructively as a leverage to help edify and educate and stimulate and, where is appropriate, cooperate with various people in political and economic and industrial power to elevate the condition of man on the face of the earth.
For instance, it seems to be that in the Vatican Library there are a great deal of books concerned about the old Christian tradition, which it spoke, about what Eastern philosophy speaks nowadays about. Something like, let's is it true about reincarnation, for instance, about life after life and all these type of subjects?
Well, I'm not familiar with the contents of the Vatican Library except references to specific manuscripts that have been published. But I do know that there are, in the last few years, a large number of Gnostic and Apocryphal Gospels, those discovered at Nag Hammadi, as well as the materials connected with the Dead Sea sect, the Qumran scrolls from 1945. And in both of these, this ongoing field of Hellenistic Judaism and primitive Christianity, we do know that the mystical Jews before the time of Jesus, including the groups later known as the Essenes, the Therapeutai, the Qumran sect, were heavily influenced by Neo-Pythagoreans and by various traditions from Egypt in the mystery traditions and earlier Greece. And they combined these with the prophetic tradition of Israel. In other words, they were universal. They were eclectic in their absorption of elements. These people were the people who many New Testament scholars say performed the background for such personalities as John the Baptist and Jesus himself. In other words, they grew out of Jewish mystical circles that were eclectic, that had already absorbed influences from Egypt and India, Persia, Greece and Rome, and other cultures. And these people did believe, we know that these types of people did believe in reincarnation. Jewish mystics at that period did. So would not be surprising to find references in the canonical New Testaments which could be interpreted to imply that Jesus himself knew about or accepted the doctrine of incarnation. That's reincarnation, but that I don't think is the main point. We have solid evidence that the kinds of Jewish mystical circles that form the background for primitive Christianity did accept the doctrine of reincarnation, totally on grounds outside of the New Testament.
Mm-hmm. When was it the Old Testament written, more or less?
Well, the Old Testament was edited into its present form over a period of many centuries. The historical period which is represented by the Old Testament is roughly about 1700 BC to about 400 BC, from the story of the patriarchs who are supposed to have lived about 18 to 1700 BC, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, to the time of Malachi, the last prophet of the Old Testament, about 400 BC. Now, the editing of those books went on from roughly the time of the monarchy, about 1000 BC, under David and Solomon, when you first had a centralization in Jerusalem. And the editing, of course, according to some scholars, went on subsequent to the period of the canonical Gospels in Jewish circles in the intertestamental period between 400 BC and the time of Jesus. It's interesting to note that most of the mystical doctrines in the New Testament are prefigured in the Jewish literature from 400 BC to the time of Christ, known as the Apocrypha. Rabbis at the Council of Jamnia in 97 AD declared that the Apocrypha was not part of the canonical Jewish Bible. And that effectively cut out the proof text that primitive Christians, including the writers of the New Testament, were using to verify the divine claims of Jesus of Nazareth. In other words, Jews between 400 BC and the time of Jesus developed doctrines of the God-man, the archetypical God-man called the Son of Man. This figure was found in Persia under the term Kaiomart, the one who ever resurrects himself. In India, it is known as the Purusha, or the divine principle in the creation, the intelligent principle in the creation. The Primal Man in Persia, the primordial being. This primordial being, God in human form or divinity expressed in terms of humanity, according then to the Persian tradition and to the ancient traditions of India and Greece, absorbed by Hellenistic Jews, was a figure who was one with the eternal Brahman or Father, who the Jews came to identify, mystical Jews came to identify with the coming Messiah during the period before Christ. Political Jews expected a Messiah who, like Judas Maccabeus, would throw the Romans out. A political Messiah like the Judges, who would throw out the enemies of Israel and establish the state. But the mystical Jews expected a Messiah who would bring an interior kingdom, the God-man, the Kaiomart, the Purusha, the Son of Man. Jesus only talks about the Son of Man in the New Testament. And he disclaims any revolutionary objectives connected with the overthrow of the Romans in Palestine. And that was one of the reasons, of course, why he was crucified. He was thought to be a seditionist as well as a sorcerer. His miracles, his psychic and spiritual feats, were called sorcery, and his threat, they thought, to the political stability of the Herodians and the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sanhedrin under Rome, led to his execution. What I'm trying to point out is that the mystical doctrines of Christianity had already developed in germ form, in seed form, in Jewish mysticism for at least 2 or 3 centuries prior to the time of Jesus, during the period of the Apocrypha. And during that period of time, we can see that the major concepts of the East and the West were merging. So if we want today to reconcile, for example, the higher insights of Christianity with those of Hinduism or Buddhism, we should study this period when those insights of India and Persia, Greece and Rome had already merged with prophetic Judaism among the Essenes, the Dead Sea sect people, the Therapeutae, and Jewish mystics. Because Jesus' whole claim was to ignite in every man what was real in him. I am the Father are one. I am in you, and you are in me. These miracles that I perform, those who live in me, who believe in me, and who participate in me psychically and spiritually, will do, and do greater. In other words, he saw himself as the initiator of a new race. The code name for that new race was the Son of Man, the Purusha, the Kaiomart, the new being. And you see, that really is very similar to what the great rishis and yogis of India and Asia intended when they thought that by learning forms of psychophysical integration between the mind, the various levels of the mind, the various sheaths of the body, and the true spirit, the high self, the Atman, that they could create an Atmanic consciousness, awaken an Atmanic consciousness in every person, and cause that person to be reborn spiritually, metaphorically, as a new being. In other words, in place of the ego, the Atmanic consciousness would take over. And this is described as a new birth. So Jesus is talking about, and the primordial aims of Christianity in the root tradition of pre-Christian and post-Christian New Testament studies, really focuses on the same objective as the great Eastern sages and rishis. But I think we have codified, you see, our sacraments in Christianity, the Mass, penance, all of the rites that we perform, prayers to the saints, are all in order to bring us closer to those higher dimensions of reality within ourselves and in the universe. They're not meant to be the preserve of any one group or any institution or any organization. That sacramental principle is meant to be the prerogative of peoples of all nations and all traditions to awaken this higher consciousness, this Christ consciousness, this new being in them that the Greeks call the Logos, that the Persians call the Kayamart, that the Indians call the Purusha. So I think that's the difference between institutional religion, to a large extent, and the original élan vital, the original intentionality, the original spirit behind the Gospels of Christ.
So last question about religion now.
Yeah.
How was it that confession started, how was it that it started? For any special reason, when and where did it start?
Well, private auricular confession started around the 9th to 10th centuries in Northern Europe, when priests or presbyters, the second rank in the ministry under bishops, were traveling out into primitive tribes in Northern Europe, and people had to be reconciled to the church after they had, and to their own conscience, after they had committed various crimes or sins. And so they went through a period of penance, and they recited their sins or confessions to a traveling missionary priest. Before that, in the early church, in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries, as far as we have evidence, if a person felt guilty in his or her conscience for something, they confessed the sin publicly in front of the whole church. And then the pastor of the church, who was in those days a bishop, the priest did not celebrate the Mass until after the 3rd century A.D. The bishops only celebrated the Mass in the early church. The bishop would assign as pastor of the congregation a penance to the person who might perform it for years or months. And then at Easter, at the end of Lent, at Easter, when the new converts were being baptized, the bishop would pronounce a prayer of forgiveness over the penitents who had previously confessed their sins, maybe months before or years before. So that was not private confession, that was public confession, you see. And prior to that, in the dim recesses of the 1st century AD, we just know that the kind of thing known as metanoia, or repentance, which means getting beyond meta, beyond nous, the mind, conversion to a new perspective, seeing oneself in the divine light, led to a transformation and forgiveness, and this was connected with entry into the community of the church known as baptism, which in those days was a form of outer rite symbolizing the inner reality that was occurring in the soul of the individual, the transformation of their consciousness, the enlightening, and all this language got attached to the outer ceremony because of that. All this went on, but penance itself, the sacrament of private confession, did not develop until the Western Church only, between the 9th and 11th centuries. And then in the later period, it got into the Eastern Church. To this day, the Eastern penitent, either as an individual or a group, simply confesses his sins to the priest right during the liturgy, with privately, of course, in a corner, and then goes on to receive. So there have been many different practices connected with penance in the history of the Church.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, changing a little bit the subject and coming to parapsychology.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What nowadays there is a lot of investigation going on, about the energy fields, the thought patterns in people, and through different instruments that didn't exist before, but however those psychic people were able just to perceive them without these modern instruments.
Right.
Okay? So, can you tell me something about all this field, this large, wide field?
Mm-hmm. It's a very exciting field, and it's very important for religious people in all traditions to begin to understand it.
And even for scientists.
Right, for scientists too, but also for religious people. It's important for scientists because we're coming to a new understanding of the relationship between mind and matter, between consciousness and intelligence on the one hand, and what we call physical properties of matter, organic and inorganic on the other. Secondly, for religion it's important because many of the things that are claimed as miracles in the history of religions are understood better if one understands the facts of contemporary psychical research. The human mind, the human spirit, has power to reach out beyond the power of the body, to know things at a distance, called distant viewing or clairvoyance, to pick up the thoughts of other persons, called telepathy, to affect the properties of matter external to the body, called psychokinesis. And all of these are natural faculties that human beings have been born with and have had for centuries, but we have only just begun to understand them. These energies can be used not only for affecting the properties of matter external to the body, but also for helping to heal other people. This is how psychic or spiritual healing or healing miracles have worked throughout the centuries. These energies are thought-directed, not by our conscious thoughts so much as by our great unconscious mind, which is not ours alone, but one which we share with the entire living universe.
When you say...
Carl Jung called that the collective unconscious, and our individual minds are just termini or computer points in that one collective unconscious, it would seem.
But when you call about the unconscious mind, are you speaking about the subconscious, superconscious mind that the yogis speak about?
Both. The unconscious encompasses both the subconscious and the superconscious. It refers to that which is not in the conscious mind of the individual. The subconscious that yogis talk about is the lower instinctive mind, which we share with the animal and plant creation. The superconscious is the higher realm of intuition, insight, creativity, revelation, spiritual guidance, which brings man on the evolutionary path from lower to higher forms of life and being. And Western psychologies have not had these two terms on the map until very recently. It's only for a few years, 50, 60 years, that since the Freudian Revolution, that we put the subconscious on the map. It was only since Carl Jung and more recently transpersonal forms of psychology that psychologists are even beginning to talk about the superconscious, and many of them are still not talking about it. Until we realize that there are sources of transcendent wisdom and information available to us by altering our states of consciousness, we can't make very much progress, both in science or in religion. To me, one of the great values of yoga is that it is a science, a psychology, a very elaborate ancient psychology of the psyche of man, which realizes that there are techniques of body and mind for changing one's state of consciousness and tapping in to this higher creative way of guidance, of inspiration, and transforming the behaviors of human beings as a result of this. And I don't think, we can just focus. We must focus on social reform, but we must also learn to focus on the transformation of the inner consciousness of each of the people who make up our peoples. And when we do that, we'll create a new field, as it were, of mind and of energy out of which we can create something better on the planet.
Of course, that all our past experiences, not only of this life, but according to yogis from past lives too, are really stored in our subconscious mind.
Yes.
And in a way or another, it's not so difficult to relate to those impressions because they are lying in that subconscious mind.
Right.
And you can remember them and you can, visualize them or whatever. But when those people speak about the future, speaking about the past is something that has already happened.
Yes.
And in a way or another, it is registered somewhere in the Akashic records or whatever you want to call them. But as far as the future is concerned, I mean, how is it possible to know something that is going to take place in the future? How it's going to happen? Why and so on and so forth? What is the reason for that? How does the mind operate in that field?
Well, I think the future is definitely different from the past, and the way we know the future is potential, and the way we know the past is actual. But to answer your question, in precognition, or in religious terms, prophecy, what appears to have been happening is that the mind begins to function in a higher, more spiritual level, out of the buddhi rather than the manas, to use Sanskrit terms from the Indian yoga. And when it does, it has access to resources that our normal consciousness does not have. It not only has, you see, the mind, let's compare the mind for a minute. Let's use a metaphor of a computer. Imagine a great computer, and you ask a question of a computer about what is going to happen with a certain problem that has not yet been solved, that's going to be solved in the future. The computer may telephone Tokyo, Moscow, New York, Montreal to get the answer that it doesn't have in its own individual memory banks because it's plugged into the collective unconscious. You don't even know it sent out those telephone calls. Then it computes the answer, given all the facts that you don't know, and it comes up with a projection of what will happen if all of those factors remain on their present course at a certain target date in the future. Mm-hmm. And that is an accurate prediction, given all of the factors that are there at present. The actors involved can change those factors if they will to do it, but most of them won't, on a probability scale. So what happens is that the mind then, using the metaphor back now to the mind subconsciously and superconsciously, unconsciously computes what we don't know, the intentions of people we haven't even met, prognosticated forward to a certain day, a certain time, and presents us simply with a picture, the same way you get a picture on the screen or a card from the computer, with what will happen if people involved as actors in that drama do not change their course. So all of the prophets in history and all of the good precognators have said this will happen if ABC doesn't change. The prophets of Israel said repent, which means take a new mind, metanoia, get beyond the mind, in other words, take a wider view, change your course of action, or else this will happen. The future is not fixed, it's open-ended, it's plastic. But we can get a pretty good picture of what is going to happen in the future because a large number of factors are already determined and some factors are not. Unless those few factors that are not determined change, it will come out that way. And in given cases, it may be already fixed because of past actions that nobody can change, or it may not be, and we don't know at the time.
Yeah, so it comes to me that it's not something for sure that's going to happen. I mean, it's something that you really presume that it might happen according to the different...
That's correct.
The different
future
parameters you have around
The most successful prophets are the ones who, by telling their prophecy, get people to change so that their prophecy does not come true.
Yeah.
However, there are some things that may... Let's take a hypothetical case. Some things may have already been done by several people whom you know, and you may not know about it. And they may be about ready. They may already be caught for having done it. Say they did something dishonest.
Yeah.
But you don't know about it.
They have experience about it.
Yeah. They are going to have to pay the price for it. And the computation that you don't consciously know and they don't consciously know as to when they will pay the price is already laid ahead. You may have a precognitive vision of that, and you may pray about it. But you're not praying for them to change now, because no matter what they do now, they still have to pay the price of what they've done in the past. So that prophecy is one that can't be changed. Do you follow?
Yes.
There are some that can be, and there are some that can't be. Now, if we know that there are realistically, shall you say, 500 people in different parts of the earth determined to do something on a certain date, the likelihood is that by prayer or even by intervention, political intervention, you could stop 475 of them, but you'd miss 25 of them, just on probability statistics. So the likelihood is that the prophecy or prediction you get that a certain thing is going to happen because you're not going to be able to, even if you pray or act, stop all of them from doing it. However, if there's only one person who's bent on doing something, you may get a vision of what's going to happen unless he changes his mind. Then you can pray. Then you can go try to find him, or maybe 2 or 3 people, and you have a more realistic chance of changing the future that you foresaw. You see my point?
Yes. So, but what I intend to say is that, okay, for sure there is nothing that you can say, okay, this is going to happen, okay, because I see how you figure out that something is going to happen.
There's a probability, and sometimes you have a very strong feeling because there's a very high probability.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have a very tenuous feeling because there's a very slight possibility.
Yeah, something like the possibility of a couple, okay, that are very much in love and they have been going out for 10 years.
Right.
And there is a high degree of possibilities that they are going to get married sooner or later.
That's
because of that.
That's right. But you see, both logical knowledge, physical and logical knowledge about something that could take place in the future, if it's an important event, only a fool will not take that knowledge into consideration. I think the same is true about precognitions and prophecies, provided the person who has the precognition and prophecy has a score of accurate ones in the past. In other words, if the person has learned how to read reliably his or her impressions, then we should take it into consideration. Doesn't mean we should panic, but it does mean we should take it into consideration. There are people, however, who have had impressions that are no more than projections from their own subconscious fears or hopes. Carl Jung dealt with this extensively in his writings. He called these projections as opposed to synchronicity. Synchronicity was the term he used for valid psychic and spiritual impressions. Projections were our fears or hopes that we were projecting out and reading back as if they were going to happen. And the difference between a psychotic and a psychic is that the psychotic cannot tell the difference between his projections and true synchronicity or true spiritual and psychic impressions. The person who is a balanced individual, who is also psychic or semi-psychic, has learned somehow to tell the difference between his or her own fears and a genuine impression, and to isolate it and pay attention to it.
Okay. Nowadays, coming to the point, that there are so many psychic research going on all over the world, Russia, United States, and there are so many psychics that there used to be before too, but because of being afraid,
That's right.
so many things. So, but nowadays, people feel really more open to speak about all these
That's
things.
right.
So, and there are so many investigations in universities and with different, apparatus and all these type of things. So, and taking into consideration that thought is considered to be the strongest force in the universe, right?
Right.
And is it possible nowadays just to take pictures from thought forms and of course from the auric fields with the Kirlian camera? I don't know if they have improved these methods.
Yes, they have.
Apart from the Kirlian camera, if they're using new methods now just to feel and to see more extensively the auric fields and all these type of things.
It is possible to take photographs of the whole body, not just the hands, now with Kirlian process, and we can see colors and patterns and fields changing and fluctuating with the emotional changes and with the health changes in the subject, in the person's body or mind. So we can get an accurate picture of various things that are happening both physically and psychologically in the individual. If they think thoughts of hate, we can get pictures of red flashes in the auric field. If they think thoughts...
All over the body?
Anger.
All over the body?
Yes. Especially sometimes through various organs of the body, which is the hand and the head. If we have thoughts of love or reconciliation, we get usually pastels and blues and light colors. We can see when two people are having an argument. If the people put their hands together at the moment they're having an argument, a barrier, like a rod of energy, can be photographed between the two people. In other words, it's as if an energy field blocks the two auras from merging together when they're having an argument, when the emotions are opposed. They separate. And when the persons are merged together in a loving or friendly relationship and they put their hands together, the two auras merge. Especially between a man and a woman who are in love. There's almost no two difference.
Has a specific color? I mean, the first ones, those people really repel each other, they have a specific color, like what color is it?
And it's possible to take an early detection of skin cancer. Malformation of skin in cancerous ways can be detected ahead of any other way through Kirlian photography, because after all, the energy fields are malforming.
How long in advance?
Sufficiently long to make a difference. I read that the Bulgarian State Medical Authority has approved several years ago the use of Kirlian photography in skin scans for health checkups, because it gave them a sufficiently valid jump on the normal means of detecting cancer. You see, Kirlian photography has only just begun, and it's in a very primitive stage, but we can already discern what the yogis and rishis of India have been teaching us for years, that we have sheaths of energy that act as a mold or form in which our physical body is maintained, grows and maintains itself. Sheaths, in other words, of energy, which are there ahead, according to one scientist at Yale Medical School, Dr. Harold Saxton Burr, who died a few years ago. You could detect the formation in salamanders and tadpoles. Malformations could be detected ahead of their formation in the flesh. They could be detected as malformations in the energy patterns, in the developing organs of salamanders and tadpoles in the embryonic stage. So that if you could get and this was done not with the Kirlian process actually, but with, now that I think of it, with something called voltmeters, was energy measurement. This was 25 years ago he started that research. Harold Burr at Yale.
What's his name again?
Harold Saxton Burr, B-U-R-R. And Harold, H-A-R-O-L-D.
He's
Burr.
What nationality is he?
He was an American at Yale. Yeah. Well, at any rate, this kind of research brings us to understand that we are sheaths of energy that react to consciousness, and that energy reacting to consciousness determines the growth and the maintenance in bodily health of the physical sheath, of the physical organism and its organs. And that is a breakthrough, if medical science will just pay attention to it, for the future of medicine.
But it depends very much upon your thoughts, not only of the physical sheath.
That's right. Your thoughts, your emotions, your intentions, your spirit, your state of consciousness, all affect the way your physical organism operates.
Yeah, because
or it doesn't operate.
Actually, the physical organism is nothing but a projection of your mind, of your wishes,
yes,
of your
that's
desires.
Another way of saying the same thing, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And then you asked about thought photography per se. There is a psychiatrist in Denver, Dr. Jule Eisenbud, who did a lot of research.
How do you spell it?
E-I-S-E-N-B-U-D. His first name is J-U-L-E. Dr. Jule Eisenbud, a psychiatrist in Denver, Colorado, USA, who researched for years with a bellboy from a hotel whose name was Ted Sirios, S-E-R-I-O-S. And this has been videoed. I've seen videos done in television studios. With Ted Sirios, he will think about something, and he will be asked to try to create a picture of it in his mind, and then with slow motion camera, energy fields will form around the outside of his head, which will block his head from view, his physical head from view, and then in this shield of cloud of energy will begin to form images from his thoughts. And this can be slowed down in slow motion on a video camera. Now, this has been known to people in psychical research for over a century, the claim to thought photography and something else called spirit photography. That is to say, the picking up of images projected through the minds of deceased human beings, allegedly, who do not have physical bodies, but who picture from their own memory the way they looked and project it onto a field of energy which can be then photographed. The camera lens is much more, and film is much more sensitive to higher frequencies than the human eye. We don't see them because of the frequency and the lighting, but the camera can pick them up under certain circumstances. And there's a whole new science beginning to emerge within the field of psychical research known as thought photography and still called spirit photography. One of the persons who has done a lot of work on this is Professor Walter Uphoff, U-P-H-O-F-F, retired emeritus professor of economics at the University of Colorado. He has written a book on it, and he has slides to present to document it. In addition to that, there are extras on tape of voices on high-frequency ultrasonic tapes, which can be made into, then slowed down to cassette speed, of voices that are either created in one set of instances by subconscious thought forms, which are vibrating energies too fine to pick up, and in the other instance would appear to be, in some cases at least, voices of deceased human beings manifesting in the astral belt of energy around the planet. Konstantin Raudive, Dr. Raudive was a German, rather a Latvian psychologist living in Germany before he died, had many years of research on taped voices of this kind, and Professor Uphoff worked with him on that project. This whole thing, of course, will revolutionize science as we go into the 21st century. Thought and matter. Energy is the link between thought and matter. The psychic area is, I've said in my books, the missing link between the sacred and the profane. The missing link between science and religion in Western civilization is the psychic area, which neither scientists nor religionists have bothered to study. It's the area which will unite the two. Instead of having warfare between science and religion, we can come to some kind of an understanding between how the two and how these operate through studying the psychic area, which is the missing link, I think, between the two of them at the moment.
And is there any possibility nowadays, because I have read some books about it, in which, through different apparatus or through different machines in which they are researching nowadays, they are trying to increase the volume of the high voltage in order to create bigger vibrations or high vibrations, just to communicate with those deceased people?
There is something called the Spiricom machine, which has been worked on by an engineer by the name of William Meek in North Carolina in the USA. M-E-E-K. Okay. Professor Uphoff has also worked with him and has some recordings from Meek's laboratory. And the machine evidently is an ultrasonic white noise background machine against which voices that are too thin or too high a frequency to hear within our range can be amplified gradually into a hearable range. And it is alleged, and I have heard tapes which purport to be conversations between persons who have died and persons who are alive in the laboratory. And the information given, we don't know all the details as to how it operates, but we do know that the information given to those subjects was accurate about things that were known only to the deceased and the living party.
They give their experience in the other side of their life, or
only in the next belt, the next plane to the physical. You see, there are many planes according to the traditions which we have, from the history of the literature, from shamanism to modern psychical research and the near-death experience, studies with mediums, studies with people who've died and returned after clinical death. There are certain pictures that we get, which an American psychiatrist named Stanislav Grof, G-R-O-F-F, has written about in a new book called Beyond Death. He's mapped the things that people who die and come back say about the afterworld. He's mapped what mediums have said, what spirits allegedly have said through mediums in different cultures, and they match with what people in the near-death experience are now reporting to the psychiatrists who've never read any of this literature. The picture is more or less the same. And the picture is something like this, that when a person dies, there is a kind of area in which at first they are fairly close to the physical plane, and during that period of time, and then afterwards, if they're more highly evolved, may project through into the mid-levels of consciousness of living people and create psychic impressions or create psychokinetic disturbances in the atmosphere and things like this. So that what lies behind traditional ghost stories is not all superstition. There is a scientific residue, scientific in terms of psychical research, that can now be dealt with.
Mm-hmm. But only just,
only at the edges.
Yeah, I'm only coming to this lower planes, I should say. Not
However, we do know that throughout the centuries, prophets and sages and masters in different religious traditions have claimed to have had apparitions of deceased ascended masters and angels from the highest spheres. In other words, we're not limited to talking to lower astral beings in this field. For the whole history of religions has claimed that dead prophets and dead saints and dead masters of wisdom have communicated back to the living, inspiring great sages or scientists, etc., in the history of human revelation and discovery. So, but we cannot measure that with physical scientific instruments. We can measure whether or not a voice is being amplified from some other dimension to the extent that we can say, here's a voice coming from somewhere, it's claiming to be from somewhere, and we've eliminated radio waves because we put shields around the room and radio waves can't get into it.
Yeah.
See? But, in other words, our instruments are so primitive now that we can only just measure the edges.
So, okay. So if this world comes to be a projection of the mind, okay?
Yes.
According to yogic tradition, this world is nothing but mind. It's a creation of the mind, okay?
But we have to be careful when we say that, because yogis, Hindus and Buddhists do not mean, when they say that the world is a creation of mind, that it's a creation of my individual mind or your individual mind. And that's the difference between a nut or an insane person and a sane person. When a yogi or a Buddhist says that the world is a projection of mind, he means the cosmic mind, the mind of God, the divine mind, the collective unconscious. Mm-hmm. And our minds are also points or termini in that cosmic mind. And together, we, the collective universe and its hierarchy of intelligent beings, has created dramas and subdramas in different places. So if I want to recreate the earth, I have to get a vision of it, but I also have to project that vision so that others can pick it up. And it has to be an authentic vision. It can't be one that I create. It has to relate to something that's potentially real or valid. And then sharing it as a group, we have to build the earth after the image that we have seen, that heavenly image. And that really is what Jesus' prayer, thy kingdom come in the earth plane as it already is in the heavenly places, means. We had a vision as to the way it should be. Let's let it become that way on earth in our social behavior, in our actions, in our outer life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just the individual projection, it's the collective cosmic mind projection in Eastern philosophy that's being discussed.
Yeah, the cosmic mind comes to be the super mind, the cosmic mind, whatever you want to call it. And our minds are nothing but a projection of that cosmic mind.
Or a point within that cosmic mind.
Yeah, yes. A point within it, in the middle of the circle, different points. And
our individual mind can't break loose from its source, the cosmic mind, shall we say, in order to recreate the whole projection, because, however, individuals who are strong mentally can influence the field of life and energy around them and around others who will come within their orbit. That's why great teachers, masters, as well as great dictators have used charismatic power for good or ill throughout history. The individual mind can accomplish a great deal in turning the pivotal point to transform a corner of the earth for a period of time, shall we say.
Mm-hmm. So those people, for instance, who have got a vision of the Virgin Mary in Fatima in Portugal or Lourdes or whatever, is that an expression of a higher being that appears before their minds, or Well, of course, it can be also a creation of their own minds, but usually it
Yes,
comes to be,
right.
a projection of a higher being that they are able to see from a different dimension.
I
or
think we
something
get an
like
insight into what might be happening in the Eastern concept of Ishvara that Swami Vishnu Devananda was just talking about here at the camp last night. Ishvara is the personal manifestation of the divine intelligence, of the divine being, for you. Now, I think what happens that when the higher levels of the universal consciousness desire to create a new stimulus or a new point of catalyst or revelation to remind people in a certain culture of something that they've forgotten, a transformation of consciousness, a transcendence that they need, it will break through. And in Catholic countries, it may break through as apparitions, and will break through as apparitions of the Virgin or of Christ. In Islamic traditions, people may see a vision of the Prophet, or in Israelite traditions, Jewish mystics may see visions of Enoch or Melchizedek. You follow what I'm saying?
Sure.
Or a Buddhist may see the Buddha, or a Hindu may see Krishna. It's the same one universal formless God who, for a specific reason, is using, like I would use German if I'm speaking to a German, and Spanish if I'm speaking to a Spaniard, the language that they will understand for the same message. And I believe those are valid spiritual revelations. They're not creations of the individual minds of those people who in many cases were illiterate and didn't expect it. I think those are valid revelations, but they have to be understood with the universal symbolism of spirit and space and the collective unconscious in order to decipher what they're saying to all of us, not just to Catholics. And in that case, in all of those, interestingly enough, those Catholic revelations in Europe, Fatima, Lourdes, Garibaldi in Mexico years ago, and all the rest of them, all of those revelations are the same thing. They're reminding man who's caught up with his own ego, with his own materialistic, rationalistic culture, competitive culture, that there is another dimension that he will never master while he's operating out of the level of ego and logic and physical observation only. And the only way man can be reminded of that is by seeing apparitions of the Virgin Mary, or by seeing apparitions or flying saucers, or seeing apparitions of saints or of dead people. Whatever cracks through from the higher levels of consciousness to create holograms out there of visual reality for him or her or for the group, that's an educational process. That's God and nature and history educating the human race to look up instead of down.
So do you
See,
have
that's
any,
the way I would interpret it.
do you have any experience, or do you have any records, or do you have any studies made about flying saucers? I mean, if there are other, let's say, inhabitants in the outer space trying to communicate with.
Well, yeah, there is a lot of literature on this. It's called UFO contactee literature. It's a whole field of study in sociology or comparative religion to look at, because the interesting thing is that the message generally that comes through these collective sources in this literature imply that man is not fully grown up, that he is in danger of destroying himself, that he must accept universal principles and break down the barriers between nations of rivalries and ideologies and religions, and accept one universal divine consciousness and become again capable of going forth into the worlds of space with others more highly evolved than us who've learned this a long time ago. Now, whether or not, even if one is a total skeptic and says that that is not real, that's a beautiful message. And it's a message that's coming out of people all over the world, many of them ignorant and illiterate, who come up with it after having said that they saw a UFO or an occupant. So sociologically, it is a very important psychic phenomenon, and I believe it's real, and it's on the same order as the apparitions of the Virgin and all the rest of it. Because according to the ancient mythologies of East and West, we're not alone in the universe. There are physical universes, parallel dimensions, as well as paraphysical or spiritual universes, psychic universes, and everything in between. And I think that in all of those planes and in all of those universes, just as there right here, there are fish and there are birds and there are insects and flowers, there are hundreds of different species around. And they don't bother us because I don't bother the ants in that anthill. I'm letting them work out their own karma. You see? But on the other hand, if I can help a bird that's wounded, I'll help it. And in some ways, maybe they're dropping in to let us know they're there is their way of helping us, just to let us, to awaken our collective unconscious to that reality.
Now coming to the point nowadays too that these psychic researches are going on. What is your opinion, about the mediums, psychic people? I mean, all these people who are really operating in this field, who are working in this field.
Well, I think in the past they have been persecuted and suppressed in Western civilization, especially during the Middle Ages, the witchcraft purges and burnings and the heresy hunts. I think that even in the 19th century, the accusations against magicians and witches and sorcerers and things like that. And I think in all religions, the danger existed in ancient history that a person who was able to perform psychic feats or phenomena, if he was a member of a different religion from your own, was of the devil. And it still is, you see. And we have to unmask that sociological, psychological process going on. For the first time in history, people who do psychic readings, mediums, are free to demonstrate this thing. Some of them are developed, some of them are not. Some of them are sane, some of them are not. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. But at least they're able to come out and show us that this is a side of our own human nature that we have not explored, that these faculties are real. And so somebody has to be able to say, aha, look, I got this message from so-and-so and it must be real. Because until that happens, the majority of people won't awaken to their own potential in here. If you're going to get somebody to learn to operate a computer that you gave them last Christmas, say you gave your son a computer last Christmas, and he doesn't know there's anything to be done with it, he just thinks it's a toy, a decoration. So you have to show him someone else who knows how to operate a computer, and he gets the idea from that. So these psychics and mediums who are going around are performing a function, and that is to awaken people to their own natural potential. The problem is that at this stage of development, we haven't any kind of way of screening the valid impressions from the projections on the part of the psychic or the medium or the individual, unless the individual is advanced ethically and spiritually as well as psychically. And we just have to use our own discernment in finding people whom we approach if we want to explore this field. We just can't sort of go to anybody. We have to be ready to admit to ourselves that this one is wrong and this one is right, but we have to have an open mind and go at it that way.
So what about healing? I mean, nowadays also, many people are working in psychic healing all the time. What can you tell me about healing and the different means that are used for that and how they are doing it, and
Well, one form of psychic healing is
succeeding in those types of...
There are great things that have been done in the area of psychic healing. As I said, the energies
let me tell you something
are capable of affecting the energies in another person's body and giving them a boost.
Excuse me before
you
go on. For instance, in Spain, we have got very many people who are able just to heal with the hands, even by telephone, right? There's a person in down south of Spain, that if you have a disease, whatever it is, so you phone him, and through the telephone he's able to heal people too. I mean, there are very many different ways in doing so, to imposing the hands and all this type of things. Right. So, can you...
Yeah, well, I think all of these different routes are valid, and they operate somewhat differently. I think that touch healing has been explored at the New York University School of Nursing by the head of the school, and Dr. Dolores Krieger has all of the nurses taking touch healing because they recognize that there is something. Loving identification with the patient plus the energies of the nurse can make an effect in the psychology and physiology of the healing rate of the patient. So we've also had experiments with animals which show that, and plants.
Is there any experiment made in which, I mean, you are just trying to send your love and your good vibrations to heal a person?
Yes.
And that is cut.
Right.
That's by a camera, just to feel the energy
Well,
fields.
you can yes, there have been photographs of transfers of energy with Kirlian process from the weak. Say a person comes with a certain part of their body with a problem. Say they have a problem with the kidney. And the healer comes, and before they photograph the healer's hands, and there's a bright aura, and they photograph the body of the patient, and all around the body is a bright aura except the kidney, which is weak. So during the healing, the healer puts the hands over the kidney area, and when the healing stops, the kidney area around on the patient is normal with the rest of the patient's body, and the field in the healer's hand is weaker, indicating that there has been a probable transfer of energy from the hands of the healer to the target organ in the body of the patient.
Does it mean at the same time that the healer has less energy in that moment?
It means that they have allowed the cosmic energy that is flowing through them, part of it, to go to the patient, but they are able to rebuild that immediately. But for that instant or two, as soon as they take their hands off, it's weaker until they move about and concentrate and get it back.
Yeah, that's the most common way of healing, through hands.
That in yoga is called pranic healing, meaning prana. But by telephone, it could be either a psychological healing or it could be, in fact, a real psychic healing, because the energy in the voice, we know the voice contains words and also emotions that affect us. So the energy field in the voice can have an effect in catalyzing something in the energy bodies of the person at the other end of the phone.
Right. Even through thought transference, you can
That's
heal
right.
people.
That's right. And that's another form of healing. The person's subconscious mind has a programming that is not strong enough, healthy enough, and correct enough to affect their own body. Say they have a problem in their foot, but then I come along, or someone comes along, or you come along with a power to visualize their foot as well in your own imagination, in the subconscious mind, and to send it to their subconscious mind. And it takes over with such a boost that it sends forth the proper signals to their foot, from their own head to their own foot. So that's thought transference healing. And that is the way that many healers whose energies can't be measured. There are some healers that get a tremendous result, but you can't measure the energy transfer because they're using thought healing. The healing is going into the subconscious mind of the patient and boosting the subconscious programming for a healthy organ, and that's sending out from the patient himself the additional energies to the organ.
You're interfering in the subconscious mind of the patient for him just to cure himself.
That's right. The same way I interfere with you if you have a battery on your car that is gone out, is dissipated. And I come by and you said, can you lend me a boost? So we have a cable, and I put the cable from my healthy battery to your battery, and as soon as it gives enough juice, your battery can take over and do what it's supposed to do, and you thank me and I go on my way.
Yeah.
So we do need other people to interfere when we are down too far.
Can't you just cure through direct thought? I mean, in other words, just, okay, you just concentrate your thought in your foot, and from here I'm sending my whole energy to your foot to be cured, to be healed, instead of going through the process of your own mind and just try to interfere in your own mind just for you to cure
you see,
yourself.
It has to be accepted by the mind of the patient one way or another. Sometimes you can do it directly. Sometimes you can directly do it to the organ or to the foot by transferring the energy, yes. But with some other people, it might not work that way because their own subconscious programming might take over 2 or 3 minutes later with the same wrong programming. So if you can change the programming in the mind of the patient...
How do you change it?
Yours. If I have a thought form that's stronger than yours, and I keep concentrating on it, sooner or later you'll pick up my thought form as if it were your own, and your own will be transformed now into that. See what I mean? We're doing that with one another all the time anyway. somebody comes along with a strong conviction. Without even speaking, he begins to get the response from the other people that he wants. See? Now, for healing, that can be very effective. We shouldn't use that to impose our own ideas on people unless they're cases of definite benefit or need for the other person's well-being. But in the case of healing, that is for the other person's well-being.
Yeah, a more dense way of doing it, and a more crude ways of doing it, a more grosser way of doing it could be through suggestion.
Suggestion is a way of getting the patient to accept your ideas by using verbal sounds.
Right, and it's a more cute way of doing
You can do it very effectively with verbal sounds, but sometimes the verbal sounds won't take effect, and you have to combine the suggestions with thought projections. With some people who are very suggestible, suggestion will work. But some people are not suggestible. However, even people who are not suggestible will pick up thought forms from other people and not even know they picked them up.
Yeah.
We've proven that through the Maimonides Medical Center in New York that did research on dream telepathy. Individuals could project whole sequences or images into the dreams of sleeping subjects, and when they told the dreams in the morning, the part that was projected in would be integrated into their own dream, and they would think it was their own thought.
Yeah, that's induced thought or something. Something like that. But which, I mean, in the United States now, in Canada and Russia too, I know that there's going a psychic warfare in the way that through mediums and through psychic people, they are trying to interfere in the thoughts of those people who really, are in charge of the army, for instance, of the armed forces, and just to change their thought patterns according to the power of the thought of these mediums.
Right.
And also these people are able to visualize those atomic submarines hidden somewhere, and they give reference, to the military people in Soviet Union or whatever, so they are able, just to localize, to know exactly what is going on, what they are thinking, and all these type of things.
Well, this
it's
I've
called
read.
Psychic warfare. Yeah.
I've read about this too in journals in U.S. and Canada, and books which have recently been published. Martin Eben has a book called Psychic Warfare.
Yeah, I know that.
But this means that human civilization is getting to the point where it's taking the mind seriously. Right now, they're doing it for defense or aggression purposes. But the spin-off of this is going to be, after a while, that a lot of those people out there in psychology and physics who didn't believe in this, in universities, are going to have to accept it.
Yeah, right.
And it's going to transform the culture of the earth. And we have to learn that our thoughts are things, and that we have to be responsible for using positive ones rather than negative ones to rebuild our human life and community and the planet. We have to turn this from negative use to positive use. But the fact that people are taking it seriously enough in military organizations to experiment with it is very interesting, because it means that the whole planet is on the verge of a new mind culture era.
Sure.
And that I think that's a part of the evolution of the planet. In other words, I think it's a stage, people, we've gotten to the point now where, we've built automobiles and planes and rockets, and now we're beginning to realize that there are other ways of communicating and transporting our realities through the mind, and I think that this is the next step of human evolution.
Is there any element in Earth that really amplifies thought power, like crystals, for instance, quartz crystals, or any other element that they are starting to use them very much now?
As you know from experience here with Swami Vishnu and Marcel Vogel, who gave him the crystal, and there has been a lot of other material printed on this whole subject of crystals. Some of it is imaginary and some of it is real, and I'm not a crystal expert, but I would expect that the crystal is a kind of magnifier, as claimed, for thought subtle vibrations to amplify them and direct them. This is what Marcel Vogel claims. And I think that this is in effect what Edgar Cayce, the sort of sleeping prophet who wrote about whom all the books have been written, said he did an Akashic reading, he claimed, on Atlantis, or an ancient civilization from the past, which destroyed itself by the use of crystals, which amplified energies to the point where that caused the earth crust to break up and the great flood of Atlantis and all that. Now, whether that is historical or whether it is not, it's certainly a picture of something that is almost happening right now, that human beings are experimenting with those kinds of crystals to amplify thought energies and other forms of cosmic energies into doing our work. And I don't look on that any differently than I look on explorations in physics or science in any other way. I think, if we can find various types of energies that we haven't used instead of the internal combustion engine, which is causing the ozone belt around the planet to pollute, we'd better find it pretty quick. And if we can find energies that can levitate by cosmic energies, overcoming gravity or whatever, it's high time that human beings learn to find it instead of putt-putt motors.
Mm-hmm. And which are the toughest, let's say, investigators or searchers now in the States, and which universities are the ones who are investigating more about all these phenomena, healing phenomena, thought breeding, thought energy?
I don't know that too many universities are. Hardly any are. Stanford Research Institute is researching distant viewing, but some of the scientists there, like Russell Targ and others who are doing that good work, have a limited view and an unnecessarily uninformed view about the reality of such things as out-of-the-body experience or the other spiritual implications of psychical research. They feel, it seems almost, that in order to satisfy the materialistic, rationalistic guardians of science, that they have to sort of say their thing is scientific, but all the rest of psychic research dealing with the soul is not. That is dangerous talk, because I feel that we have to explore the subjective and the spiritual implications of psychical research for human culture just as much as practical things like moving matchsticks with psychokinesis or distant viewing into other places. And if we start limiting our science among the pioneers like Targ, then we're in trouble. They wrote a book called Mind Reach, Targ and Harari, that disturbed me quite a bit because of that. Limitations they were going to put on the field before it's even accepted.
Right. How do you explain, those bending of spoons and everything else through?
Well, those bendings of food, Geller, that's real. I've seen it done. Geller has bent things in front of me. Marilyn has been with him had dinner with him when in the restaurant that Marilyn and others just chose the restaurant. He walked in and sat down to eat, and the waitress's tray started rattling and spoons started bending and twirling in the middle of the room and falling onto the table. Yeah. In other parts of the room.
Was he through his thought power?
Unconscious. He was it was like poltergeist phenomenon. It was not conscious thought power. He didn't intend to do it. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to mess up the silverware.
So how did it happen?
It happened.
How did it happen? What's the explanation?
Well, we have a field of energy around us, and we're doing things, and other entities are doing things with that energy with which we're not consciously aware.
I see. So finally, what's your... do you have any reference apart from, Dr. Moody's book and Dr. Savron and Dr. Stevenson about these near-death experiences?
Well, the books that are
out-of-the-body experiences or astral, experiences.
One of the best books on that was done before Moody and Kubler-Ross and Sabom and all the rest of them. It's called Analysis of Psychic Communications by Dr. Robert Crookall, Crookall, a British physicist who was a psychic researcher before he died a few years ago. And he did an analysis of all of the out-of-the-body, near-death, and mediumistic materials, mm-hmm. which to me is the best yet in that field. And he did it before Moody even discovered the field.
Oh, I see.
Moody came along late. The only reason Moody and Kubler-Ross got headquarters publications and the rest of it, is that they, headway with publications, is that they were clinical psychiatrists. Psychical researchers had been doing this for half a century and getting no publicity.
Sure. So, can you recommend me now some of the best books about all these fields?
Well, I would say that there are numbers of good books. The one that I just mentioned by Robert Crookall is a good one. If you want to read on life energies, the Harold Saxton Burr's book called Fields of Life. Another book by a man named Russell, Edward Russell, who wrote a book called, it was about fields of life and Burr's research, but applying it to the universe. And I've forgotten the name of it, but I'll give you the name later.
Yeah, we can do something. We can make a list with the different names and books, and if you don't mind.
Yeah, and there are general books on the history of psychic phenomena that are coming out now in great length. But I wrote two books, which are supposed to be a survey of the scientific aspect of the field, in 1979, 350 pages each. One of them was called.
About all these different.
One of them was called From Ancient Magic to Future Technology, and the second was called From Ancient Religion to Future Science.
So in that you gathered all these.
I gathered all the stuff that we've been talking about.
Beautiful. And they are published in
1979 by the University Press of America in Washington, D.C.
Both of them, 79.
Yeah.
You can get
and then I published another one three more in 1983, last August, through the same University Press of America.
And they about all these phenomena? Or?
Well, the last three were about the specific application of these things to the spiritual dimensions. The first was on psychic readings, psychic development, called Religion, Science, and Psyche. The next was on survival research, and it was called Spirits and Cosmic Paradigms, on mediums and research with mediums. And the last one was called The Psychic Roots of Ancient Wisdom, which attempted to show the roots of especially the Western religious tradition in psychic experiences and mystical experiences of the founders.
Can you get them easily here in Montreal or somewhere?
They're in Washington. I don't have the distribution of them here. They're distributed in the United States by the press, but I can give you the address of the press.
Yeah. Okay, I can order them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Okay. Well, I hope you've got enough there to work on.
More than enough.